Hello and welcome to the Mindful Business Podcast. I'm Janae. I'm a brand strategist and designer who is navigating the world of business ownership while trying to prioritize my mental and physical health. This podcast is about exploring the ways in which we approach our work and our lives as business owners with the intention to craft a business that serves you rather than consumes you. So if you're tired of the hustle and grind culture and want to build a business that fits into your life and not the other way around, then these are the conversations for you. We are on episode 3, which means we are well and truly doing this thing. Today, we're focusing on burnout. So we touched a little bit on burnout with Kedu in the last episode, and I wanted to elaborate a little bit on that. So we're going to be looking at signs of burnout and consequences of it. We're also going to be looking at support systems and how to set those up before you experience burnout or before you experience struggles, but also creating them while you're going through something as well. And lastly, we're going to speak about the loneliness of being an entrepreneur, because I don't think that that's spoken about enough, and there's reasons for that, and we'll get to that at the very end. If you haven't done so already, please share this with a friend who you think might be able to benefit from these conversations, or a family member who might be experiencing what we discuss. I'd love any questions or comments or DMs. I've already had a couple so far, and I'll weave those into the conversations as we go. But as I mentioned before, the goal with all of this is to just create more conversations and community for people who might be experiencing the things that we speak about and looking to build a better work-life balance. All right, let's get into it. So, burnout. Tricky topic to approach. And I realized that I was trying to prepare for this, that it's quite complex. And firstly, I think something that I wanted to kind of touch on is the phrase burnout, like many other phrases in the working world and the corporate space and the social media world, is thrown out quite a lot now. I mean, just doing research, you can type in burnout articles and you get 100, if not thousands. And I think some people use the phrase burnout a little too casually for what it actually means. And I wanted to kind of differentiate the type of burnout that I'm referring to, whereas it's not just you've had a bad day or a long week. It's not just stress. There's a difference between stress and burnout. Stress is a physical response or an emotional response to a stressful event or a busy week, a busy day, some kind of intense going on that you have. That's stress. Burnout is what comes from neglecting that stress or not doing anything to deal with that stress. That is burnout. Burnout is a mental, physical, and emotional state of exhaustion entirely. It's not just having a bad day at the office or having a busy time at the moment. I'm not saying that being busy, like super busy and overly busy, can't lead to burnout, and it does, and that they're not connected. But there's a difference of perspective that I think in this topic of conversation, in this context that I'm speaking about, I want to be talking about burnout in the real sense of the word, where you are genuinely exhausted and depleted in more than one way. So a couple of the signs that I'm going to list, I found from research. And this, again, it's always tricky because, so one of the signs is constant fatigue. And if I was feeling tired or exhausted and I was Googling, am I burnt out? And the first thing I saw was fatigue, it would be very easy for me to self-diagnose myself as, oh my gosh, I'm burnt out. However, in my case, and the reason I'm using this as an example, is that I do experience fatigue quite regularly, especially at the moment. I'm working on some medications, so my fatigue has been worse lately, but that is because of medical conditions. I have a thyroid deficiency, and that is why I experience fatigue. It is not from burnout. So I'm going to list a bunch of these signs, and maybe you relate to some of them, maybe you don't, maybe you relate to all, if not most of them. What I want to be clear on is that not all of these signs mean you have burnout. They could come from other things and other reasons, but they could be contributing to the experience of burnout. Obviously, it's very stressful having major fatigue and not being able to function on a daily basis, especially in the mornings. That contributes to the pressure that I experience at work and the time frame that I have to actually get stuff done. So it's all interwoven, right? let's get into it, because otherwise I'm just going to mumble on this for ages. So a couple of the things, if we're looking at the mental side first, is decision fatigue, brain fog, forgetfulness, not being able to decide on a particular thing or action. It's just this kind of numb limbo phase in your mind of not feeling like you're actually able to move forward with anything or any decisions. Then you get the emotional side. And again, could be so complex. Time of the month, various factors, life happening, getting involved. But one of the signs of the emotional side of it is irritability and having a short fuse. If you have a short temper, you know that about yourself. Don't think you suddenly have burnout if you don't. However, if you're naturally a calm, peaceful person and you're finding yourself being quite irritable and short-tempered with people or yourself even, or just the world around you, then maybe take a step back and think why you might be feeling that way and if there's other things leading into it. Some of the physical signs of burnout include your weakened immune system. So if you're constantly feeling fluey or weak and depleted physically, then you might be experiencing some signs of burnout. There's also obviously the tension in the neck and the shoulders from just holding yourself quite tense. Now again, maybe your posture's bad. Maybe you're not sitting properly at your desk. There's a lot of things that could be leading into it. However, these are some of the signs that could be indicating that you're experiencing burnout. Maybe you're aware of them. Maybe you're not. Just something to think about. And the reason why I wanted to bring up some of these is the fact that Kedu, as an example, took years to be able to, one, recognize that she was experiencing burnout, and two, pull herself out of it and change her circumstance is too long, in my opinion. There is so much damage that can come from neglected burnout and just constantly pushing, trying to push through it. Burnout is not something that you are supposed to push through. It is your body screaming at you to say, please stop or pause or take a step back or change something. It doesn't have to be this extreme 180 of what you're doing. It just means toning things down or shifting things around, changing things up a little bit to give your body and your mind what it's so desperately crying for. That is why I wanted to bring up some of these signs. Is in this hustle and grind culture, we push through everything. It's this whole thing of, we just work through it. Some things don't need to be worked through. Some things need to be seen, acknowledged, and then worked with or around, but not through necessarily. You know what I mean? Let's go into support systems. The reason these support systems are so important is because, one, they help you avoid experiencing things like burnout or exhaustion or fatigue or feeling overwhelmed, because you've got outlets and coping mechanisms on a regular basis to help you manage that. If you're in the middle of it and you're in the middle of experiencing burnout or some kind of struggle, it's not too late to implement support systems. So the way I look at this is there are 3 layers. There's yourself, your business, and your community. The self side of things is things like your routine. Are you waking up at a regular hour? Are you eating well? Are you moving your body during the day? There are healthy routines that you can instill that help create balance and consistency in your life to offset stressful situations and feeling overwhelmed. There's also a sense of release, like if you journal or go for runs, I guess, is a form of movement, but it's also just a sense of energy release, right? If you're feeling frustrated, what are you doing for yourself to release that frustration and to deal with those emotions? Again, what we said is that burnout is the result of not dealing with stress. And you can deal with stress in a kind of passive way by thinking about it or meditating or breath work or journaling, or you can deal with it in a more active way, which is exercise, go for a workout, go to a boxing class, punch a bag, do something for yourself that releases that frustration. Then there is the business side of things. Now, this is the structure and systems that I preach about in my work with my clients. Creating a business structure that supports sustainable growth instead of putting you under stress and pressure. It's also including things like delegating. Are you able to delegate tasks to other staff or outsource things? Like, for example, money stresses me out. I can't do my taxes. Am I going to try and put that on myself? Absolutely not. I have an accountant for that. Yes, it's a financial responsibility and another expense, but it's worth it for the sanity of my brain within my business. All right. So it's things like delegation and outsourcing, and then automation. There's a lot of systems you can have in your business that make your life easier. So self, business, and then the last one is community. This one is really, really important to me because as someone who works by myself, for myself, in my little office all day, every day, and this is why we're getting to the loneliness side of things as well. Community is so important, and it's not a given. It's not a default setting when you're working for yourself. You don't automatically have a bunch of colleagues or people, even just people around you, right? Just feeling that energy from other human beings, living life and doing things. You don't have that as much. But you can create a sense of community as well. And a way to build this community is through things like networking or simply just sharing with your friends and family. They might not have a full grasp of what you are talking about, and you can explain that to them, but feeling like you're sharing the journey with someone, it makes a big difference into coping with that stress, right? And the last one is co-working spaces. It doesn't necessarily work for me because I have big screens that I have to work on a daily basis, but co-working spaces, again, it's just the sense of being around people and feeding off of that energy that you get from other people doing and living life. So self, business, and community. Those are the 3 pillars of support structures that I would say you would need to have. Not need to have, no, let's say it. You need to have it. You need the balance of the 3. They don't necessarily have to be evenly weighted. I don't necessarily have a big networking group. Social media is my kind of community that I'm building on, and then a couple of my clients. We'll talk about the whole competition versus community thing in a second. So I've worked quite hard on the self and business side of those pillars, those 2 pillars. I work really hard on my routine, my lifestyle. I'm quite specific about that. And the way I've structured my business is obviously very intentional. The community side of things is something I'm still working on. This is actually part of that pillar. That's why this whole project exists. It's because I felt like I needed a bigger sense of community in what I've been experiencing. Those I feel help quite a lot, that if I do experience burnout at any point, not only is it less likely because I've got these support systems in place, but if it does happen, I've got these support systems in place. So it helps in dealing with all of that. It makes it slightly less overwhelming and maybe just a little bit easier to go through all of it. The last one, and it kind of ties into the whole community side of things with the support systems, is just the loneliness of being a business owner. I don't think it's spoken about enough. And a big reason why it's not spoken about enough, there was a quote from a book called Executive Loneliness by Nick Johnson. And he explains that entrepreneurs and leaders are less likely to share when they're struggling with something because they feel like they have to maintain this illusion of being in control and being strong. But in reality, what that ends up doing is makes their isolation and their loneliness tenfold, right? It just deepens the experience further. And I think that there's an ego thing obviously involved in that, is when we put ourselves in the front of anything and claim a leadership role or, the head of something, there's this pressure, there's this weight on your shoulders of always performing and always thriving, and wobbling and failure and unsurety is frowned upon. And I think that that's nonsense because you're human and you're not going to be strong 24/7. If you are, genuinely good for you. I love to hear that. However, that is not my experience, and I don't think that's the experience of many other people. So there's this isolation it's like this vicious cycle where you want to lead and you want to be viewed as strong, but that means you can never tell anyone that you're struggling with anything or share, which then just kind of puts you in this loop of isolating yourself even more, which stresses yourself out more, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. Now, I mentioned the aspect of competition versus community, and that's a tricky thing to navigate because obviously sharing with people in your field is how you connect best with your work, right? I would love to share with more people in my life about what I do, but not all of them are going to understand it. And sometimes I need someone to bounce ideas off. So where do you go? How do you create colleagues from competition? And again, there's this ego understanding here. I initially never spoke to other designers or brand strategists or people doing what I was doing because I didn't want to fraternize with the enemy. And I ended up shooting myself in the foot because I didn't have anyone to speak to about the experiences that I was having with clients or the struggles that I was having. So something I started last year, and it's been incredible, it's been such a value add to the work that I do, is I have a few people who do what I do or do work in the same industry as me, but we have different services. We now work in a partnership, not necessarily always working together, but even just going for coffee and sharing an experience. I literally didn't know them from a bar of soap. I followed them on social media, or like a few people have reached out to me, and that's how we formed friendships or colleagueships, whatever, if you want to call it that. And it's been amazing to switch this idea of competition over to community. And it's not to say that we don't work against each other and that our offerings don't clash sometimes, but now we have a friendship and a community base to work on that with. So I think the thing that I want to just kind of hone in on the most is working by yourself and for yourself can be super scary and super isolating, and it doesn't have to be. There are systems and structures that you can put in place. There are routines that you can have, and all of this builds up to supporting you to avoid things like burnout or create coping mechanisms for when you're experiencing major stress or burnout kind of experiences. A couple of things maybe that you could do instead, like for example, me reaching out to competition and creating colleagues instead, is minor things, kind of like just getting out the house. If you're feeling isolated, if you work by yourself, this whole remote working thing is amazing for a lot of reasons, but there are also problems that come with it. So instead of having a Zoom meeting with a client or a colleague, go out for a coffee, see if you can meet them in person. Just get out into the world. Maybe an email can be a phone call. Yes, you can follow up with an email for the paper trail later, but I find that in-person conversation can really change how I'm feeling about the day instead of just feeling like I'm dealing with everyone over email. So those are two things that you can do to kind of combat the loneliness of working for yourself. I sincerely hope that it sounds silly, but I hope that none of this resonated with you. I wouldn't be surprised if it does. Obviously, you're listening to this podcast for a reason and you're having probably similar experiences. And I think that one of the goals in this whole podcast is that I want to try and normalize that. Not normalize in a sense of make it normal, because it shouldn't be. This shouldn't be what we're experiencing on a regular basis. But there's nothing shameful in it, and there's nothing wrong with you. And there are ways to improve the situation. And even if it's just sending me a DM and saying, hey, this is how I felt this week. I didn't know who to tell because I felt like no one would understand it. I understand it. And I can tell you for a fact, there are multiple people who are experiencing the same thing. And there's nothing wrong with saying so. If anything, it's going to help. I feel like there's this pressure for us to never be struggling with anything, which is nonsense. But if we know that someone else is going through the same thing, we feel less alone. And maybe that is just the main thing for today, is that if you are struggling with burnout or heading towards burnout and you're struggling with isolation or loneliness, these are some ways you can try and improve your situation or just feel like someone understands. A little bit of a heavy one this week, but we're going to be talking about a lot of heavy topics. We will have a lot of positive spins and solutions. I'm very solution-based. As we've said, there are support systems that you can create for yourself. However, it's still hard. So next week might be a little bit more fun. But for today, that's it. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Business Podcast. If this resonates with you, please follow along, share it with a friend or a family member who you think could benefit from it. Leave a review, a comment, a question. I'd love to hear from you. What are you struggling with? What do you want to know about? Also, don't forget to take a break today. You're allowed to go at your own pace. See you next time.